Good evening and welcome back to our story time. We're continuing with Singer on the Sand. And we're on chapter 7, Tama's Victory. And last week we left our story with Marta sitting in the witch doctor Tama's house, and she was touching his evil charms, the snake. She had picked up the snake. And Tama walked in and he was so frightened by her picking up the snake that he dropped the pail of water he was carrying and just couldn't even speak. And so that's where our story left. And so let's continue. Satu had seen little Marta climb the ladder to the witchman's hut. He stood for a moment thinking about what he must do. After the words he had spoken to Tama last night, it was not good for him to go and take the child away. He must run to the house on the beach and tell Hans. Hans would know what to do. Hans, Hans, Satu stood out of breath at the teacher's door and called, Hans, come. Hans came out, his shock of red hair glittering in the bright sunshine and his jolly face laughing. Hans, Marta has gone to the witchman's house. I think you should go and bring her out. Tama may want to make medicine today, and he would not like her to be disturbed. Yes, let's go. Hans loped off up the beach and into the path that led to the village. Satu followed. Within 5 minutes, the two boys stood at the foot of the ladder that led into Tama's house. Look, this is Tama's cooking pot. Satu pointed to the black pot upside down at the foot of the ladder. Now, why do you suppose he threw it down there? Then a strange sound came from the hut. Both boys shook with fear. It was the sound of something that groaned and gasped in agony and terrible pain. Satu's spine prickled and the hairs along the back of his neck stung like poisoned seaweed. It took all his courage to climb the ladder far enough to look in through the open door. Tama stood in the middle of the hut, holding Marta in his arms. His face was hidden against her bright hair, and the awful sounds were coming from him. Marta, Hans called to her in a quivering voice. She scrambled out of the witchman's arms and ran to the boys. Tama fell forward on the floor, and his face pressed to the split bamboo, and the groans and sobs that twisted his body were like those of a wounded animal. Even after they led Marta away, Satu could still hear the heartbreaking sound, and the terror inside his own stomach could not be quieted. Hans, he said, after they had put Marta safely inside the stone fence, Hans, I think Tama is making powerful medicine. I never saw him make that kind before. Ask Marta what she did in Tama's house. Both boys talked to Marta, but the only word they could get from her was that she had blessed the poor snake. Satu puzzled over this for a long time before he understood. I think I know. She must have gotten hold of one of Tama's devil charms, a dried snake. Is that why Tama lay on the floor and moaned like that? I don't know. A terrible thought had come to Satu's mind. I think there is a bad curse on anyone who touches a devil charm. Oh, Hans, something terrible will come to Marta now. Hurry, run and tell your father so he can make the strong medicine of God. Hans laughed. Oh, Satu, devil medicine and snake charms can't hurt us. You see, witchcraft has no power against those who worship God. Satu was not convinced. He still stood trying to put away the fear that had dropped over him like a heavy cloud. For us, oh Hans, for us it is horrible. I cannot help fearing for Marta. Well, come, let's talk to my father. Hans drew his friend into the room where the big teacher sat among his boxes of magic. After Hans had explained in the strange language of these people, the teacher turned to Satu. Don't be afraid, he spoke slowly in the island tongue. The God we worship does not allow us to be hurt by devil charms. Let us kneel right here and tell him what has happened. Then you will feel better. So the three of them knelt in the quiet room, and although Satu could not understand the words that the big teacher spoke to his God, they soothed away the terror from his mind, and for the first time he felt God's comforting presence. Later, as the boys roamed along the beach, Satu asked so many questions about God and his magic that Hans could not follow his talk. "You want to know so many things so fast," he said. "Did the teacher tell God all about Tama?" he asked for the third time. "I mean, did he tell God that Tama is lying there on his floor moaning and groaning?" "Yes, he told God the whole thing," Hans said. "He asked God to catch Tama, just like a man catches his little child who tries to run away from him into danger." Satu tried to picture it in his mind. A great big man, much bigger than the big teacher, running along the jungle path after Tama. He smiled. "You think God will catch him?" "My father says God already has his hand on Tama, but he is still kicking and fighting and trying to get away." The boys climbed up to Satu's secret lookout perch among the rocks. Here the fire mountain loomed before them. Today it vomited out flame, and the boys could hear the sea hiss as fiery molten stone hit the water. Satu strained his eyes, searching the narrow strip of white sand. No birds today. The noise and fire of the mountain had driven the birds away. "Those fire spirits are surely angry," Satu said to Hans. "I have never seen them so angry." He wanted to tell Hans about the powerful medicine Tama could make and how everyone on Great Sangir feared his curses more than they feared the fire mountain. He wanted to tell Hans that the men of Sangir, along with his own father, had gone to the southern islands to bring Islam teachers. There was so much to tell, and the words they both understood so few. It was like trying to push a river through a hollow straw. "Hans," he decided to try anyhow, "my father has gone to bring Islam teachers." "What are they?" "They are teachers, maybe like your father. They will teach the magic of Islam." "So that's where the boat went yesterday," Hans grinned. Satu could see that he was not troubled by this news. "You see," Satu spoke slowly and tried to make every word clear, "Tama is behind this. He wants to drive your father away from the island." Now Hans laughed. "Of course Tama can't drive my father away by his witch charms. God told my father to come here, so of course nobody can drive him away. But the Islam teachers may keep the people from coming to hear the words from God's holy book. That wouldn't be good." "No, that wouldn't be good," Hans agreed. "But God is strong, and he can take care of all that." And on that day, among the coral rocks of their secret perch, Hans taught Satu to pray and to talk to God reverently, but as to a friend. Comforted by their prayer and their talk, the boys sat for a long time and watched the fires spout from the volcano. The sun had risen to mid-heaven and the rocks burned their feet. They ran down to the beach and waded in the cool water and hunted for crabs and shells until Hans' mother called him to come to eat. Then Satu wandered back toward the village. He glanced over toward the witchman's house and saw that the black pot still lay upside down at the foot of the little ladder. Again a terrible fear struck the island boy. It was now past midday. Tama had not eaten his morning meal yet. He had not even come out of his house. Maybe the witchman was sick, or maybe... Satu's spine tingled with pure horror. Maybe Tama was making the most powerful spirit medicine that had ever been made on this island. Satu thought about what Hans had told him of how God was running after Tama and trying to catch him, and Satu thought that Tama was way out where even God couldn't get hold of him at this time. Hans just didn't know. The big teacher didn't know. They hadn't seen how Tama's witch medicine worked. Satu talked to his mother about what he had seen in Tama's house, but she told him not to worry. Tama was a strong man and not very old either, that he knew how to mind his own business and would appreciate it if everyone else minded theirs. Still, Satu could not forget the agonized groans he had heard that morning, and he couldn't help worrying about Marta. After he had eaten, he went past Tama's house again. The kettle was gone. The boy sighed with relief. At least Tama was still alive, and what was he planting against the big teacher? Satu shuddered. It must be something dreadful. 3 days passed, and Satu watched Tama's hut because he could see it plainly from his own house, or at a great distance from the beach and the teacher's house. While his father was away, Satu spent all his time in one of these three places, and he kept his eyes on the witchman's hut so constantly that he was sure Tama could not leave or enter the hut without his knowing it. So far as Satu could discover, the witchman neither bathed nor cooked food. On the 4th evening, Satu went to the jungle spring to bathe. He always came to this spring now, curious to know what the witch doctor might be doing. Tama came down to the spring, and Satu was startled at the look of his face. It was drawn and pale. He drooped with sadness and misery. "Do you still go all the time to the teacher's house?" Tama asked him. "Yes, I go every day, because Hans is my friend." "Are they all well?" Tama stooped under the stream of water and began to wash himself. "They are all well. Why shouldn't they be?" Satu stood still and waited for the witchman to answer, but he said nothing more. He bathed, filled his kettle, and went back to his hut with the same sad, closed face, and Satu stared after him. "Now what can be making him so miserable?" Satu asked himself. "Is he grieved because the teacher's family are not sick?" Satu could see that few of the village people went to take medicine from Tama, and he did not go to any of the village houses, but the old councilman Gola was busy every day. He went from hut to hut and spent all his time talking. Satu knew what he told the people. He told them that great new magic was about to come to the island. Chief Meriden had discovered that his people were fond of new magic, so he had gone to bring them the finest magic of all, and they should get ready to welcome the new teachers. When the villagers asked what would become of the big teacher and his magic when the new teachers came, Gola told them that they could choose between the two kinds of magic, but he was sure they would all choose to follow Islam, because they would not need to leave off any of their old customs. Gola persuaded several of the village men to mark off a big piece of garden land right above the teacher's house on the sand, but higher up the slope of a fertile hill. Satu watched them too. They drove sticks into the ground and even wove a low fence of reeds, and Gola began to clear the spot. He dragged away bush and fallen branches and trimmed the fruit trees that had stood inside the marked-off area. "Now why didn't Chief Meriden let the big teacher have this ground?" one of the village men remarked as he helped with the work. "This would have been a fine place for him to make a beautiful garden there." "The big teacher's not going to stay here," Gola said, "so of course he doesn't need any place." So the talk was closed for the moment, but Satu heard it whispered on all sides that the chief had made a big mistake in forcing the teacher to make his home on the sand. By rights, he should have had this fine plot of ground that was being readied for the Islam teachers. If Gola heard the talk, he gave no sign and paid no attention. He went every day to clear and trim and make the place nice for the strangers who would be coming any day now. Tama did not go near the place. Satu saw him every day, and each day he looked more sick and miserable than he had the day before. Then Satu found out that Tama went at night to watch beside the teacher's house. It was by accident that Satu discovered this. He had gone to bed when he remembered that he had left his best knife stuck in the trough where the teacher's flowers grew. He crept out of his hut and streaked along the path down to the beach. He was not afraid, because he knew that no bad spirits lived near the teacher's house, and it was not a good thing to leave the knife in the wet soil of the flower trough overnight. He had just drawn out the knife and turned back from the darkened house when he saw something move. It was a bent figure standing close to the children's window. With a surge of desperate fear, Satu fled along the path back to his hut. He looked back twice, but although the moon gave enough light to see things distinctly, he was sure no person followed him. Then he wondered whether he had imagined the dark form crouched there at the children's window. He sat just inside the door of his own hut, and waited. He waited for a long time, and then he saw a figure coming slowly along the path. Even before the person turned aside to climb the ladder of his hut, Satu knew it was Tama. The boy felt his heart quicken in his naked chest. What could this mean? Why should Tama be watching the teacher's house, and why at the children's window? Had he been going there every night? Why? It was late when Satu finally got to sleep, and his mother had to waken him the next morning. He went down to the spring and bathed and sat eating his fish and taro when he heard a voice calling outside his door. He jumped up to welcome his friend Hans. He looked into Hans' usually jolly face, but this morning it was troubled. Satu, is Marta here? Why, no, Satu said. I just woke up a few minutes ago. I haven't seen her. Satu felt something black and heavy fasten itself upon him. Come with me, Hans said. Perhaps she has gone to the witchman's house. My father told her not to go there, but maybe she forgot. The boys ran over to Tama's door and called loudly in front of it, but there was no answer. The door stood open and the boys climbed the ladder and looked in. There was nothing to see. The hut was in order, but Tama was not there, and there was no trace of Marta. We don't know how long she's been gone, Hans said. She ate her breakfast and went outside to play, as she always does. She must be somewhere around the village, Satu tried to comfort his friend. Maybe she went up to our perch among the rocks. You remember, she tried to follow us up there a couple of times. The boys raced for the beach and clambered up to the perch among the rocks, but no little girl was there, and without a glance at the smoking fire mountain, they hurried down again. The black weight dragged up heavy on Satu now. Should he tell Hans that he had seen Tama crouching outside the children's window last night? Could Tama possibly have anything to do with Marta's disappearance? The boys saw the big teacher hurrying along the path. They ran after him and overtook him just as he entered the village. He called the people from every hut to ask if they had seen Marta and to urge them to come and help look for her. At Gola's hut, when he stopped and called, both Tama and Gola came out. When Tama heard the teacher's words, his face twisted and his whole body shook. He almost fell down the ladder of Gola's hut, but he stumbled down and took hold of the big teacher's arm. He could not speak. And that ends our story for tonight. You know, we learned tonight about how Hans had taught Satu how to pray to God and how to talk to him just like a friend. And so, you know, you can talk to God just like that. You can talk to him as a friend. And next week, we learn what became of Marta. Was she lost? Had Tama done something with her disappearance? We'll find out next week. So remember, when you say your prayers tonight, to pray for those missionaries who are out telling people about God's love for them. And I wish you a good night. Thank you.